Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for tuning in again. Welcome to this show. And if you're in Uganda, children are going back to school. I know it's a little bit emotional after 2 years of having children home and seeing them and taking care of them. Here we are. But then also us as young women today, we want to add a conversation to this matter. Is what do we then do with 2022 now that it's here? We've been in it for 10 days. So what do we do? What's the agenda that is on the table? Today I have two amazing young women in the women's movement. They are doing a lot of things, but then also they've been part of these conversations as they happen. 2021 happened and we had exceedingly a lot that we covered. So we want to see what 2022 will look for us as the young women's movement and the women's movement in general. On my panel today, I have Kirabo Marion, who was standing in for me while I was disappearing. Thank you for coming today, Marion.
It's always a pleasure.
And next to her is Rebecca Jonah. It's a young woman and a feminist in her right. Thank you for coming to this panel today.
Thank you for having me.
So we want to imagine or reimagine, because we've come out of 2 years of a pandemic with 2 lockdowns. We want to reimagine what 2022 will look for us as a movement, but then also as feminists. I was reading today and they say that at the UN, Generation Equality Forum, the feminist organizations were the ones setting the agenda. They were at the table setting the agenda and shaping the agenda. And they talked about issues of gender justice and feminist organizing. And so I thought that the narrative for 2022 will be anchored a lot in work around feminist organizing. But I want to bring you into this conversation, especially around issues of work. What will work look like for women if we are to reimagine it or to envision the agenda that will be set around work for women in 2022?
Our agenda or the reality or what we want our reality
It
to
can
look
be
like.
also part of our reality, but then also what
We
the
want
agenda can be.
Okay. So coming out of a pandemic, I think at least for the Ugandan woman, the first thing will be where does she get an income? Where does she start from? The market woman who has been shifted left and right, or the one who has been working in the farm, or the one who has been hawking on the streets, or the sex worker even, or the teacher, different aspects. So with the reopening of the economy, I think if I was to set, and just saying from my perspective, if I was to be the person to set the agenda, I would look at what the small businesses have gone through, and which most of these small businesses, like when you go to the market areas, it's the women. When we are going, the people who are usually selling the masks and selling those small items, it's the women. When we go to the restaurants, it's a bit of men, women, but mostly women serving. When you go downtown, they're the one who are serving the meals to the traders around. So I would look at how can I because now we take, how are we looking at ways to revamp the economy once again and try to make things easier for people. So how do I take, the thing would be, how do I take the financial burden from these women? How do I provide maybe a cheaper financial help to them? How do we make, let me say, small and cheap loans available for them? How do we reduce taxes? I'm not sure how far that debate has gone.
They're increasing.
There was that, how do we then reduce rent for those who have boutiques and things like that? How are we deliberate in making sure that the economy is more viable for small businesses? Because this is where most women are, in these small businesses. When we go to farming, how are we then making sure that they can compete on the market? I have had people talk about revamping the what do they call them? these associations where farmers come together to
The cooperatives.
the cooperatives. So can that really have a conversation? Because now we are in a crisis mode. So we are looking at every mechanism on how to make people's lives better. And then when we go to, of course, most of the women who have been affected are also in the education sector and together with the young girls. So when I'm reimagining our agenda, it has to be a demand on every institution of learning that these girls must be in your class.
Exactly.
And they must be in your class without stigmatization. And then we must look at how your sick base can be able, you can bring them up to a time of being able to monitor these girls and making sure they have the diet that is necessary. Yes, you need to get that deliberate to make them stay in school, because what you're doing is saving a generation. 90,000, over 90,000 girls is not a small number. That is a huge number, almost.
It's a big number.
It's a very big number. And those are just the ones that we know of recorded.
There are
they
invisible
might
numbers
be,
that
yes,
we don't even know
exactly.
about.
So how are we making sure that these girls have a future? That's very important. But also, how are we intervening in the school systems? I was having a conversation with someone about high school fees, and they were telling me that, you see, government cannot just say, do not raise the fees when you are not contributing anything to the school system. Even the school, even the government-aided schools, government has greatly withdrawn funding. And of late, we also saw a 40% cut on most of these institutions. Government cut its expenditure there by 40%, which is quite problematic and quite ironic, because you would think that this is the time for them to increase. Yes, so a lot of things that government is doing don't make sense for someone that is trying to get the country back on its feet.
Rebecca,
So,
before we even go on, let me bring Rebecca into that conversation, because then you raised something that I want you to pick up on. The fact that a lot of countries away are trying to help the economies boost up, and then so they are putting in funding, they are making sure that the interests on loans are less than what that should be. And, they are trying to, create, almost like a soft landing for the economy. And here we are in an economy that for some reason has had its taxes go up. So life expenditure is even increasingly. So people are now starting to actually pull out. And that is something we should be worried about, especially if you're trying to create, a narrative of perseverance, of resilience, and of grit. How do we have the backing of government in changing the narrative, especially for women, the informal sector, because they make the majority of that. They held the economy in the most areas of crisis. So how do we, bring them back to this conversation and give them, let me say, stimulus packages, so, ways to help them, keep on keeping on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. One thing you realize is that government has put in a little bit of incentives. SMEs, the Ministry of Finance is to release money this quarter, I believe, that SMEs, those that want to get back into operation that were affected by COVID. It's a recovery fund. So women can tap into that. We have the green jobs at Ministry of Gender that they facilitate women groups to tap into that. They are existing support systems. The problem is that most women do not know how to access these funds.
How do we deal with that accessibility?
Are they even accessible?
Because one of the things you need, I can tell you they are accessible. Ignorance is no defense. How do we make now, we need to sit back and say, how do we make women know that there is something they can benefit from? We increase visibility. Because there are women, if you've seen it on social media and followed, and you have to access it via the Ministry of Finance website, this information, there are women that do not access social media. Ask the women that have seen it on social media. Can we share it with the women groups?
But let me pick your brain on that, Rebecca, because, you know, the digital divide is a reality we also live with.
Yeah.
It is very, let me say, unfair to imagine that a woman who most probably has a business of 100,000 will have the accessibility of internet. Most probably in a So how are we going to have this information reach them? That there is actually finance that you can, you know, pick on and be able to boost into your systems. Is it actually something that the government is telling people? Because I also did know about that.
Is that what is your leader doing for you? If they are not giving you access to this information, all the leaders are just busy making noise and not picking this information. If you're to look at the budget, you have sectors that refund budget, money back to the treasury. Because it was not spent. Because the people that are supposed to give this information to the locals, the leaders, also have not requested for this information, nor can interpret the information.
Because do we have strategies to, you know, especially for us as women, because I'm worried that we are going to go into 2022 and still be left behind.
Yes.
Because it's something that is recurring. Do we have strategies as women to be able to have this information disseminated to, you know, the market woman, to, you know, those small businesses, to the people in the informal sector that need this money?
I think the women's movement is trying a little bit. I think it's IST, Institute for Social Transformation, that does that work around market women. But there is wanting. It's wanting. And for people that do budgeting, you understand that you cannot release, let's say, like money for visibility if it's not in the budget plans. But who does the budget? Are people going for budget consultative meetings? See, we cannot sit here and blame government, and we are not playing our role. Because if you know that the plan of the area, which is like the local councillors are supposed to say, oh, the planner did not involve us, we did not sit at the budget consultative meetings, then that is where you start the advocacy from, you get me? But how do you expect government to give you visibility when it's not in the budget nor the plan?
Marion, let me bring you in here because you preempted something that I wanted us to have a conversation on, especially around teen pregnancies and child marriages, and what the agenda for the for feminist mobilization will look like around reduced child marriages, changed attitudes around women in politics, and also violence against women and girls. 2021, 2022, let me talk about 2020 and 2021 highlighted a big deficit in our push around child marriages, teen pregnancies. And even while we were doing the work, I think this is a conversation we had a lot in 2021. And even while we were doing the work and pushing and advocating, the gap is still evident. What can we then do as a movement or as women, you know, to reimagine a different numbers? 90,000 is a lot. To reimagine, you know, how we can, you know, consolidate these girls, bring them back, empower them, but then also, you know, give them a chance to get the education that they desire.
Allow me to answer two questions, but I'll first answer that. But I also wanted to maybe perhaps divert. I think that within our crisis there might be an opportunity. That first of all, we have been crying about what the lockdown did for us is to bring glaring issues to the forefront. Things that we have always ignored as a community, as a country, as a society, that when we talked about sex education, everyone thought it was some kind of westernized agenda I remember you're spoiling the children, you want to bring in, you know, gay rights and homosexual. But I think this is our time to show them, hey, look, whether you like it or not, this is happening and you're not going to run away from it.
Let's have this conversation.
We need to have this conversation. We need to talk about sex. Secondly, we also need to have the conversation about contraceptives. because most of these pregnancies were forced upon these girls, that for most of these cases it was out of defilement, it was out of rape. The fathers of these children are mature men, you know, that the girl is 13, the person who impregnated her is 30, is 24. You get
very
60.
many decades away.
Yes, very many decades away. So it shows you our girls are not safe. Can we talk about protection for our young girls? Can we start to have conversations about male violence in our communities, how women are objectified? It has helped us show that more than ever, the women's movement and feminism is very relevant in protecting women's rights. To me, that's how I see it. So to us right now, what needs to be done is, now that we have the evidence to show what happens to a community when they do not take these things seriously, we need to capitalize on that you are going to continue to sacrifice the lives of our girls if you do not do the following. One, have a conversation in the schools, in these open spaces about sex. Sex education should be a must in our curriculums.
And bring the boys to the conversation as well.
Yes, we need to bring the men to the conversation. We need to dig up to why they feel entitled to women's bodies. Where is this balance coming from? Perhaps it's also time for us to also inspect what we are teaching these boys.
Exactly.
What are we teaching that the boy thinks he can go after a 13-year-old girl? What is happening in these homes? Because we're living in the same community. These are our neighbors. People you have grown up seeing for what? For long. Yeah, for years. And suddenly they think they can come into your home and take your daughter.
How?
Yes, uncles, brothers, you know, neighbor who, like, these are people who are close to us. But then also, we need to change our minds about contraceptives. Let us have an honest conversation about it. Let us also have an honest conversation about health, women's rights, when it comes to reproductive rights. How are our hospitals prepared to handle these issues? The maternal rates that are happening, can we shed a light on them? Can we find how to increase health care, improve health care for women in these hospitals? Like, there is so much that we can use to push back and say that if you don't do what is required and you keep on putting your head in the sand, you are sacrificing our young girls.
And I think this is a deliberate conversation we need to have now.
Yes, and this is the right time.
This is the right time.
But also, when we talk about government programs, I think that when we're looking about how government has implemented this quote-unquote support system, I think we need to look at the myogas as an example. It has been an example to all, because here is a program that has been largely publicized, I would say, because it was largely publicized during the 2021 elections. It was something that
even really, Operation Wealth Creation.
Yes, even Operation Wealth Creation. Let us see how these things have been implemented. Let me say the Youth Fund. There's also the Women's Fund. Who has accessibility to these things?
And how many people are benefited from
How many people are benefited? But first of all, who receives the money to distribute it out? We have seen in many of these cases, cadres, people who are close to the ruling party, that unless you're close to the ruling party and you have those connections, you won't see that money. I mean, we even saw how Nabanja's money was given out, and we saw the level of corruption that was in, that even when people had gone registered, their IDs were there, they had done everything that is necessary, they did not get the money. And even when it came, it was halved. Instead of getting 100, someone gets 50. Sometimes people have the leaders in this sector, and you can't really blame people for choosing those leaders, because they didn't actually choose the leaders who are given up.
Imposed on them.
Yes, and I remember opposition actually leaders having a conversation to why are we being left out. This thing seems to be for NRM chairpersons, Simanyi, the RDC, people who are handpicked by the state. So already the system of distributing these funds and these support systems are something that if you do not agree with the ruling party, you're cut off. However, also if you do not have the right connections, you're cut off.
So maybe let me ask you this. Should we then start to think about philanthropy and maybe sustainability, ways to create funds and finances for us as a women's movement outside government support?
Now that becomes tricky. You see that the way, let me say, these European countries and these American countries are able to do it because they already have millionaires whose net worth is the size, is bigger than even the Ugandan economy.
Yeah.
So they can afford to have charities all over the country and in different that are outside of government. But you have a country whose millionaires and billionaires, I don't know if you can mention them quietly, because you don't even know their sources of
And they're
income.
also inkling somewhere else.
And then there are also reports of, they're also inkling, and that's the most important, they're inkling someone else. Most of them are connected to government. Their finance, sorry, their wealth is connected to government, and it cannot survive without government. I mean, you saw how people came down hard on Sudil and almost crushed his empire, until he threatened to pull out of the economy and things. So government is, in so many ways, is not independent from, unlike in America, is not independent from how people create their wealth in our small country of Uganda. So many ways it will have a hand in how these businesses also spend their money. You get? The only way we could have done that is local banks, trying to grow our own big.
We only have Centenary Bank.
And now we only have Centenary Bank. And then when you even dig deep into these local banks, and they will tell you that when government felt that they were becoming too strong, it had to crush them. So it also, obviously, most people are afraid to show that they have that much money. It is only foreigners like the Aga Khans who can actually have, but local business owners, local billionaires, it becomes so hard given the politics. You risk people seeing you as someone who's trying to build your own power block. You have all these people that you are supporting.
So where are you getting all that money?
Where are you getting all this money? And then questions start coming up about, what if one day you decide to radicalize these women and they come for me? You get? So there's so many, our politics and economics is so, how can I say, is so intertwined and so complexly
with the everyday lives
intertwined together that the charity organizations or the local funds that we want to create for women, first of all, they might not be possible given how much people have that money to take care of all these women. That's one. But secondly, like I said, sometimes you can get misunderstood as someone who wants to get. The only people that we have been seeing capable of doing these things are the politicians. Politician has a circle of, like, let me say 50 women. But also, you see, it's still connected to government, it's connected to so politics and and the economy, we haven't yet divided ourselves, like how America can say that government should keep
foundations are on their own, government is on its own.
No, that is not Uganda's reality, unfortunately.
Rebecca, let me bring you into this conversation, but to divert it to something then we can do, because I believe 2021 highlighted our need to have mentorship, and it was a conversation that kept on happening. Young women should be able to, get the benefits of mentorship within the women's movement. The older women should then start to hold the hands of the younger women and show them the way, so that we can then start to lead the movement into the light of where we are, because here we are, but we lack the power to be able to drive, the community or the movement. So I want to talk about the women's agenda in regards to mentorship in 2022. What do you envision it to be like?
Well, thank you. I believe that we will have to first understand what were the hindrances we had in 2021 and what were those that we achieved. And then that's one of the ways we'll move forward. one of the critical challenges that you will note is that there's always been this threat between younger women and older women.
True.
I've worked to get here. I know would go somewhere and a woman would tell you, you don't know how lucky you are. For us, we work to get here. So you're not just going to come and take it.
True. I've heard that before.
Yeah, you're not going to come and take it. So we've heard that the movement has become like some of the movement people that would be mentors have become like the critics that we are criticizing. So we need to work on that. And also the young women have become too entitled.
True.
Too entitled.
That
That at some point you need to work for certain things. They're not going to be just handed to you. You need to prove that you can manage. If it's an organization, you don't have to just say because I'm young I can manage it. Can you lead? Can you be non-toxic? We need to let go of the toxic spaces in the women's movement.
And they're there.
We need to let go of the toxic spaces. We need to also not be afraid that the young women will outshine us. So if you're 30 years, can you mentor an 18-year-old as a 45-year-old woman is mentoring you? Intergenerational gap bridge. That we pull each other, because if you're waiting to get to 45 and then mentor, there is that you're not connecting with them. You need to connect with them from their struggles, and you need to let them be their own persons. You need to let young people be their own persons, and let the older women learn from the young people as the young people learn from them. Financially, I love talking about finances, because we won't be mentoring if we don't talk about finances. How do you prepare for retirement? These are conversations now we have with the eldest of the women, the ones that have great granddaughters. How do you have retirement packages? How do you buy land? How do what are the mistakes that this person made that if you made them, they would not lead you to where you need to go? So these conversations need to be informal. We get out of the hotel rooms, we get to the homes, and have this go on. We are limited in terms of financing for the women's movement. Can we use the little resources that we have? Can we go to Joanne's home and sit and drink chai mukalu and have a conversation over kabalagala, and say, when you get this money, invest. Can we also ensure to have more male engagements in mentorship? Because we find that there are spaces where women are not, and if we are to get there, you're going to have male allies.
True.
How do we get it?
That's true.
How do we get it?
You've pushed my brain. I always struggle, because whenever it comes up, I always struggle with the fact that the men need to be in this conversation.
They have to.
And it is something we need to start to be awake to, because regardless of the fact that we may not be doing the training, but they need people to be able to tell them the truths of what is and how to go about it. I want to also bring you back to also that conversation on mentorship. What then do we work around as we go forward?
Well, when I look at I just see it as okay, of course there has always been a generational clash. One generation says that in our time we were the best. Then the young generation is like, you are a sellout, you didn't go as far as you should have gone. So I think it's the same right now. You see all over the world when it comes to the feminist movement. The older feminists think that you know, we fought for a lot of things, you know. You kids want
And you're
to go too
trashing
far.
it.
Yes, you want to go too far. Now you want to talk about LGBTQ rights, and then you want to talk about domestic care work. You want to talk about so many things that we feel like you're going too far. And then they're like, then the younger generation is like, but yeah, you fought for things that you said was to fight for in your time, and now
that was your generation.
Yeah, that was your generation, and now we want to fight for other things. There are so many dimensions that you missed out, you know. During your time, it was how do you get into school, or how do you have equal pay, or how do you access this job, or how do you
own property?
How do you own property? But those are not the conversations of our time. We already have all that. But there are so many other things that you forgot to fight for. And we think that, you know, we have to have a conversation of intersectionality. There are so many people you left out in your movement. There are Black people that you left out in your movement. The gay rights that you left out of your movement. There is domestic care work that you left out of your movement. There's so many things. How does a young woman juggle being a mother, being an employee or an employer, and you know, keeping everything apart? There's also mental health. You left that out. So it will always be a pushback of ideas. No wonder the conflict, to me, it's healthy. It's supposed to be there.
Healthy. Contradictions are healthy.
Yeah, that's when you know that ideas are evolving, and you also know that the movement is progressing, that it's going to last longer because it keeps on evolving itself through the centuries. It's a first wave, second wave, third wave. Then there's Me Too. Then there's God knows what will happen tomorrow, you know. So it's a good thing. It's a healthy conversation. The pushback from that, or perhaps the bad side of that being, of course, and I think these are even beyond the ideological differences that we have within the movement. Of course, being a country that is not so open to succession from politics, you know, political positions, I think that also finds its way in also our NGOs and, you know, civil society, and also the women's movement. You need to see that the women's movement does not live in isolation of all the things that go before it. You know, one time someone was telling me that they were having a conversation that they were saying, people were saying Museveni must go, but when you look at some of these NGOs, they have leaders that have
been there the whole time.
And there are some people who are saying Museveni must go, and yet this person has refused to shift power, and there is no hope of even promotion in his organization. It is just stagnant, and they will make sure they push down everyone and just create a toxic environment. So the dictatorship is also replicated in the organization. So as we criticize, perhaps we also need to check our organizations. Are they, when we talk about governance and democracy, and your organization is talking about governance and democracy, or it's talking about women's rights and all that, when you look at your organization, does it promote the values that you seek to market all over the place? Are you walking the talk? You know, that's so important. But also for most of these people, there is a thing we call power under, and I think a lot of us women suffer from it without unconscious. You know, when you have been a group that has been so oppressed, you start to think that you cannot oppress.
Exactly.
You start to think that you cannot oppress, but unconsciously, when now you get elevated to a state of power in your own sphere of power, that
you start to oppress.
Because your thing is that, okay, they did this to me, so, you know, this is now my turn to revenge. And then you start to oppress others. A lot of, you will find CEOs, a lot of women do suffer from that. And so she makes the whole place toxic. But really, she's doing it unconsciously. It's a thing that most oppressed groups do suffer from. Black men doing it to Black women, you know, straight women doing it to gay women, white women doing it to Black women. and then the circle
And the circle
continues.
continues.
And unless we have conversations about how oppression affects us even unconsciously, that to what extent do the things that you have gone through affect who then you become and how you relate to others. And that's where the mental health issue comes in.
Exactly.
That is the only space where we can have such conversations and have such things. So back to mentorship. So before we even have the conversation of mentorship, we need to have a clinical check on ourselves
Within ourselves.
when we are going to become mentors. That how are my experiences affecting how I relate with the world and how I relate with other people? Because that also then will trickle down into how you're able to mentor people. Do you see people as a threat to your power? Do you unconsciously carry out even biases that you're supposed to be fighting,
to other people?
to other people? When you have women under you, do you treat them how the men treat them? Because unconsciously you are carrying out an unconscious bias. So that should happen with the people who want to be our mentors. But even after that, I think we have to realize that we cannot be in this space forever, and therefore we need to groom. So it is so important that the older generation grooms. If you feel that the young people are not doing it right, reach out to them
and teach
and
them,
teach them the way. People are always criticizing us young people, especially in the political space. You guys are you either. So when we actually do something, we are being violent and aggressive, and when we don't do anything, then they're like, in our time, in our time. But what I usually tell people that in your time you had more support. In your time, probably you had very strong youth wings.
And there was political will.
There was political will. In your times, perhaps you even studied for free. Like you had every resource available to you to actually grow. In your time, if you probably got into the university, you didn't have to worry about food, you didn't have to worry about tuition, you didn't have to worry about upkeep, the basic needs. A university student was, quotes on quotes, at least a certain level of limited wealth, enough, self-sustaining, But you fast forward our generation, we struggle to stay in school because there is no
the factors
goodwill.
are not constant anymore.
The poverty levels are so high. We have no mentors. That is the truth. The political parties are trying to suffocate their youth wings because they do not want them to outshine them, and they want to control power in that regard. So we're living in a space where everyone is trying to suffocate the young people.
And so the conversation is, and I think that is where I want to bring you in, because when you talked about that, it reminded me of a friend of mine who, you know how you look up to someone and then you work with them and then you actually find out that the level of toxicity that is present there. And so it began a conversation around mental health and wellness and mindfulness. And we're going to bring you in there, especially in regard to how then do we, in the movement itself, push for wellness, push for mental health awareness, but then also create, I don't want to call them utopias, but safe spaces for women to be able to thrive and also to grow. To grow without, the need to prove myself all the time, or with the fear of being looked down on, so that we thrive mentally. But in these spaces, how do we create such spaces for women?
Okay. I believe that we need to have a mediator when conflict like that around, toxic, somebody that can hold all of us to account. Somebody that can tell the other party, because sometimes people do things and they don't know they're toxic.
They're unconscious.
Unconscious, and they are those that do things that are consciously, so that you go away. Go away and leave my space. So I will do this to frustrate you so that you go away. So this mediator, their role is to say, you need that person gone, but this is what you're doing to their mental health. and this is what you've got to lose.
And unfortunately, it's happening in spaces that should be able to hold us account.
Because you see, we are having, it's like the would-be mentors, I mean, and mediators are scared of holding the other party to account because we are very few. You get it? But if I hold that person to account, she's the young person that we have at the moment that is eloquent and that can challenge the power dynamics. You get the challenges. So instead of calling the person out, let me take a back seat. And let me get the victim and say, oh, sorry, a pat on the back for you. Here is another job.
There is a solution we've not solved.
Yes, here is another job. You come and sit here with me. We do not have that. And that is something that the men have. The men do have. You attack one of their crew members, they will all come for you. And when they want to attack a woman, they all come together. You get it? We don't have that holding
solidarity.
Yes, we don't have solidarity. We have little. We have a few negotiators and mediators of that conflict. We need to build that conflict management and analysis within the movement.
That's true.
Yes. Then we need to also be able to access health care around mental health. There is still a lot of stigma that somebody is in denial.
It's expensive.
Yeah, but even when it's expensive, somebody is in denial. I'm not depressed, so let me go drink few Jack Daniels shots. I'll go home. Before you know it, you've become a drunkard. You cannot perform at work. Let me have an anger rage. It helped me last time. It's going to help me. Let me throw a tantrum. And you're still in denial that emotionally you're not okay.
So perhaps we also need to have these conversations more.
We need to have more conversations. We need to have more visibility about it. And this time, if we are saying we cannot use the mainstream media, we can share a little bit of clips on social media. I saw one man, and he wrote on his Facebook and said, someday you're there and you're feeling full, then all of a sudden you feel empty. And there were so many women that went to the man's page and said, I resonate with that. There were very few men that went there. So I was like, I have not seen this on a woman's or a women movement's page.
Oh, my friend has a page catered to that, a YouTube page called Mindfulness, catered to just having conversations around mental health.
So,
and it was a very beautiful thing to have in 2021.
So if we can have that, we can have more of our women. Because you see, that is a man. I want to see somebody like the one that has mentored me come out and say, this is how I feel. So that I can send a message and say, oh, I have felt that way before.
And then you start to deal with it.
Yes, you start to deal with it. Because you're thinking, maybe because this man does not have money. Can he, you get it, eh? So we need to see one of our own people. I've seen Helena Okring do that, and then you're like, But how do we now have it come to the local councillor? The local councillor in Shema say that I've felt that way, so that the women that sit down on the grass, in the grassroots woman, also says, by the way, I sometimes feel that way.
By the way, have you ever wondered how women deal with mental health issues at the grassroots? Because a lot of times we say, oh, you know, visible. I'll go through it. So that's just a conversation I've never thought about. How did our parents deal with mental health issues?
They would talk about it.
Some wouldn't. That is why we are having lots of toxic mothers, and we don't know. But we say, munayo mama yaita mbizibu. Nenga mama has not gone to share with somebody. We have had women come from that war that was there. They are still there. Our grandmothers went through that. Whom did they share with? I have women that tell you, oh,
how did they deal with the trauma?
You fight your things inside. But she is breaking down, and it's affecting her daughters, because she's saying, you carry on how I carried on.
And so the pattern continues.
The pattern is going generation to generation. You're in the fourth generation, you're still having the same. Because you're saying we had war in this country and we have never had rehabilitation. So how do you expect the mothers that are carrying children to rehabilitate their own children? No wonder when she comes back home and she has said, I've been beaten, gendo deyo.
So you go back in the cycle and then
you know,
turnover.
And you see, there are women. I saw Winnie Byanyima come out and defend the son, and I was seeing people saying, how can you say that? I was like, how many of you have had your parents acknowledge you in front of people?
True. Ladies, as we wind up this conversation, and this is personally, because I know personally as women, we also have commitments we've made to what 2022 will look like for us, especially in the work that we are doing. And I need you to give me a glimpse of what you're imagining, especially in the spaces that we occupy. I'll begin with you, Marion. What personally are you committing to in this women's agenda and in the women's movement to do in 2022 in 1 or 2 minutes?
For me, basically, it is having more young people join the movement in my own space. I am committed this time on grassroots mobilizing. For me, I think it's so important. Getting communities together and say, this is the issue, so how can we work together to find a solution? How can we make more campaigns that actually lead to something, that actually lead to policy change and laws changing, or a society kind of having a behavior change. I want to have bigger impact as a person. I would like to that everything I do has an impact. I would like, yes, I don't want to have a press and then it just dies, or have a campaign run for like 3 days and then
it dies away.
You know, that's such and then we move on to the next thing and then the next thing.
We've gone on.
I particularly am quite scared about this whole amendment, the constitution, the
parliamentary way of election.
Yes, I think it's a very bad idea. I am looking at how I could join the campaign against it. So that would be quite if I could contribute my little, no matter how small, my contribution to the campaign.
It is big. Your voice will be heard.
Yeah, so I would love to. At least that has been coming into 2022. That is the biggest thing on my head right now. How can we as young people kind of push back at that? Yeah, it would be such a shame if it was to go through and
we were here seated.
And we were here seated. No. So that's what I'm looking at, more organizing. Yeah.
Rebecca?
Well, I'm looking at more involvement of vulnerable groups. We're talking about women that are more vulnerable, coming more to the spaces.
Population.
You get, I am grateful that we have focused on the urban women. Can we go back and meet the women in the rural area? Can we change the narrative? Can we tap into the way of organizing they're having? Can we have different faces? You see, I've seen Buganda, Ankole, Central. No, can we go to Karamoja? Can we go to Nyoya? Can we go to Moyo? Adjumani? Come down to Chibali. Then disappear into the forest in windy Trikisoro. Can we have those rarely approached and targeted districts? Faces coming onto media. Can we hear their
have
voice?
Their stories told?
Yes, can we hear the voice? Can we hear the voice of the women living with disability? Can we have the voices of women that have had cancer and beaten it? Can we have the voices of women that are doing tremendously good work in the civil world, or in the air, in the space?
So in other words, make the invisible voices visible.
More visible and more frequent. Because I just don't want to have one Matembe.
You have many more Matembes.
we have many Matembes, but we also have many Julius Seltindes, many more Maggie Chigozis that are, doctors.
She's here.
Yeah. Can we have more women that are in aerospace? It's something intriguing that you would want to know. How do they land on the moon?
I'm going to cut you there.
Yes.
Because for lack of time, these conversations keep going. When women meet together, we have a lot of things to talk about, most probably because we don't usually have these spaces created for us. And so we are glad that as women, we sit down, especially young women, we can sit down and have these conversations from time to time. My personal commitment to 2021 is to join as many campaigns as I can and scream as loud as I can. In this particular time, I am still saying Frika and Kwenza because that is where my energy is right now. We need access to justice for that satirical novelist. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming and joining us. So that is our commitment for 2022. It is not big, but we are choosing that one small, addition to the movement helps. We are 3 here. Those are already 3 people, 3 voices that have been added to the women's movement. Thank you for coming by. I don't know if these ladies told you, but we made 3K. We are already in 3K, so we are pushing for 4K. So please like, subscribe, and continue these conversations in your spaces. Thank you for joining me. I've been your host, Tricia Nabaye. Bye.